Thank you, everyone. The reason I, including a team of audiologists, habilitationists, and surgeons, have the power to change this. I'm not going to play this video. We have already seen in the last oration, which was the changes which the team at Andhra Pradesh has brought about. We all have that power to change. But when we see things like this happening, and that is when all this power seems to be like a curse which we all have. And what these patients usually land up with is something like this, which is the worst possible thing for all of us. So this line probably which all of us have heard, and it's one of the favorite lines which I really like, is the one which I hope works here.
Whatever life holds in store for me, I will never forget.
Oops. Sorry for that.
Whatever life holds in store for me, I will never forget these words. With great power comes great responsibility. This is my gift, my curse. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man.
And I think it's time for all of us to take such kind of leaps, to have this gift and prevent it from developing into a curse. So to understand, the first thing we need to realize is what are the factors which lead to a cochlear implant extrusion. One of the most important factors which Dr. Sumit really told very well in his talk yesterday was improper sterilization, which we all do every day in our OTs. The second factor which comes in is the pressure of the overlying magnet on the flap. If it's too strong a magnet, you have always a higher chance, as you all know. Thicker implants, thinner flaps, these are again causative reasons. Placement of the implant too close to the incision when the external processor is actually hitting on to the internal component. Trauma is another major reason which we all have, and something which I have been hearing for last year or so is silicone allergy. Now what exactly is silicone allergy is something, when you go back in literature, this paper which mentions that, and what they found out is a delayed exclusion of cochlear implants with negative wound cultures and a suspected or a test proven allergy to silicone components is what they mention as silicone allergy. Interestingly, when they actually discussed their cases, there were 3 cases, 2 of them with a test proven allergy for silicone and 1 which is presumed to have a hypersensitivity to the silicone. Now if I as a surgeon am given that option of presuming to be allergic to silicone, I will always like my patients to be labeled so. And in fact, this is a famous quote by J.P. Morgan, and a man always has 2 reasons for doing anything, a good reason and the real reason. The good reason probably is silicone allergy for all the extrusions. The real reason is something which I would believe in 99% cases happens to be infection, happens to be biofilms, and this is a paper from our own country, that's Dr. Neelam Vaid and Dr. Manoj, mentioning the biofilm over the cochlear implant as a major cause for extrusion of cochlear implants. So what do? We have an option, that's something which is traditionally followed, is to explant and then do a cochlear implant in the opposite ear. However, does the Indian scenario really allow us that? We heard Dr. Vishwakarma yesterday, the first talk, that majorly the cochlear implants in this country are now government funded. Even if they are not government funded, they are through various charity organizations or NGOs like SAHI, which we just heard. Will these agencies really provide another implant, or can they afford to provide another implant to all these patients? I'm sure everybody of us knows the answer to that question. So the next question we really don't need to answer is, do we need to save this implant? Yes, we do. And the question that comes in is, can we save these implants? And I really believe in this quote for this particular condition, at least from Mr. Barack Obama, that yes, we can. Our experience at SMS Medical College Airport has been an interesting one. We did 385 surgeries in last 7 years or so in 372 patients. 7 of these patients had undergone surgeries for cochlear implant extrusion, right? So these includes those surgeries. We really went back, analyzed them and followed up a few of these patients, and this is what our experience was. Now if you look at this table, there are a few interesting facts which I'd like to bring about. The first fact, out of these 7 patients, only 1 had undergone surgery by variant technique. That really does not mean that posterior tympanotomy is bad. It's just that in our area, the area where I come from, majority of surgeries are being done by posterior tympanotomy. Only one implant we see is of harmony, it's non-spinning cochlear. That again is basically because we are comparatively have been for a long time a cochlear center, and we are starting now with other companies majorly. Importantly, when we see this, out of these 7 patients, 4 of them have been salvaged. Interestingly, if you really divide this table into 2 parts, the bottom 3 are the ones when we have probably started learning as to how we can deal with these patients. And out of these 7, 3 of them had undergone surgery at some other center and then referred to other center for management of cochlear implant extrusions. So how do you go about these patients? First, obviously, take proper consent. Now, the first consent which I always really tell my residents to take also is the chances of more than one surgery. And I'm really sure that my residents mostly laugh at me that why do I really keep on asking for more than one surgery if I'm a surgeon who is not sure of what he's going to do. That's something which is actually the most important thing when we are dealing with this kind of patients. You have a risk of injury to the implant during surgery which needs to be explained. You have a risk of electrode migration as it may come out when you're handling the electrodes. And obviously explantation is something you need to take a consent whatever said and done. So how do we go about the surgery? The most important aspect would here be probably planning the incision. Now when we do this surgery, we plan to shift the receiver stimulator package from its routine side where it has actually been to a side much more inferiorly placed. So we mark it and then we plan the incision which would actually excise the skin which has got infected and then take a huge flap based inferiorly or somewhere on the occipital artery which runs such that the posterior margin of this incision lies much beyond where your receiver stimulator package would be. So you don't want them to overlap. This is the incision which we use. This obviously seems a bit messy because you cannot use a monopolar cautery, it's pretty vascular. We elevate a flap inferiorly and then elevate another flap of the periosteum superiorly, right? And then go about liberally excising all the infected tissue, all the granulations, all the suture materials which you have put in as much as you can. You deposit the implant a bit away from the side where it had initially been. You see the biofilms and the infected material beneath. Scrape it out, drill it, wash it as much as you can. That's something which you need to do. The tie down holes which have been created need to be cleared because they can be sites for a persistent infection inside. And then we create a bed much more inferiorly than what has been done in the previous surgery. Place the implant over there, and then when you're closing it, if you can really appreciate, that's a piece of small concave cartilage placed over the area which is the most prominent area which was the site of previous infection. That's something which an input I got from Dr. Manoj, and that really helps us, or at least actually makes me feel safer that this will not be a site of extrusion again. Then you suture this back again, so the periosteal flap here, as you see, covers this well, and you have a double covering with the flap, and this is the final closure line. And this is the post-op wound after 3 months of the surgery, this particular patient. Now, one of the patients which we had undergone various surgery by Varia technique, and this is the site of, you see the infection which is happening and the implant was getting slightly exposed out here. The incision obviously differed because now we had a previously incision line which had been placed here and we don't want to compromise on the vascular part. So the incision now extended from here to the posterior aspect and not on the post-auricular area. Importantly, which I couldn't show in my last few slides, you need to remove the sutures very well. If the proline sutures especially, which I have found is a thing which actually is not very good for most of our patients now because that continues to persist for a long time and can be a site of infections. So now even in the primary surgeries, either we don't use sutures or if we use sutures, we usually are happy using Vicryl, which by the time it really gets absorbed, the implant has formed a capsule around it and it really doesn't move much. And that's the final closure line after the surgery for revision has been done for various surgeries. Post-operative course, the pressure dressing is actually important, special emphasis on the site of previous bed because that's a site where you can still have collections. IV antibiotics for 1 week, oral ciprofloxacin for 15 days, and oral rifampicin for 4 weeks are something which I've heard Dr. Needham talk a lot, and that's the reason primarily I use it, and I think there's a few literature which is based on that. We start using the external processor after 4 weeks. Now what are the other options which the literature actually offers to us? Now way back 91 we had an article which mentions the adjunct hyperbaric oxygen therapy which can help prevent this, probably in the terms of better healing. Not much literature again after that. Interestingly, we have an article from our own country which talks about salvaging the cochlear implant after wound infection, and this is from Delhi by Dr. Shalabh Sharma, and he mentions the use of tea tree oil on this area after wound debridement to prevent extrusion. Now when I had a first look at this article, I was reminded of Baba Ramdev somehow, and maybe some of his techniques, and so I went back, and this is the 2006 paper which actually mentions in vitro activity of tea tree oil, and this is actually based on very good literature now, and they even went into details and talking about that tea tree oil has a very good activity of bactericidal activity on these biofilms which are of MRSAs or MSSAs, and it's not as good on coagulase negative stuff, right? So we do have a basis for what was actually presented in that paper, and world over people have gone ahead and used temporoparietal fascia flaps and even free flaps to cover these areas even if reimplantation is being done. So what are the pearls of revision surgery for extrusion? This is what we have gathered from our short experience. We need to elevate a wide inferiorly based flap, which is based usually on the occipital artery. The posterior edge of incision, as I mentioned, should not overlap the implant site. You need to elevate a superiorly based periostal flap separately. Remove everything infected liberally, whether it's a granulation tissue or the capsules or the biofilms or sutures, whatever you think it's infected needs to go off. Drill the bone on the bed area, clear the tie down holes, create a new bed for the implant, put a conchal cartilage over the fantail area or the electrode area, and always remember that the first cell-based surgery is the best chance for saving the implant. Please do not try. So when we started doing the surgeries, the initial 3 or 4 surgeries, we tried just excising minimum amount of skin, taking care of the infected tissue inside there and just closing it with a small rotation flap, and we miserably failed. And now we actually do this, and we have been happy for the last 3 or 4 implants which we have done. So take home message is something like this, right? You see this person, the first important thing is never celebrate too early, right? Because that's something you may always land up with an issue with these implants. Don't lose hope too early. You never know which of these patients will actually go ahead. And as Vinay Kumar sir mentioned, never leave the patient till the job is over, and that's probably the lifetime of the patient or the lifetime of the surgeon and the team involved. Thank you all for your patience.
Thank you, Mohnish, for your
Thank you, sir.
wonderful presentation, and may I request Shankar to do the honors.